Well, good evening and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. This is for Friday, November 22, 2024. Now, that means that we do have one more Friday in the month of November. That'll be the 29th, a week from now. The Saturday after that will be the last day in the month, the 30th. And so then December 1st will be on Sunday. And so December 7th will be the first Saturday in December, and it'll also be, that is a couple of weeks away yet, the Saturday for our next sermon presentation. Planned, of course, and we don't guarantee such things, but we have been able to do it every fourth week for a couple of years or more now. I recently completed a listing of all the sermons that we had up so far in date sequence with the date, um, and I didn't go to a calendar and make sure it was the date it was presented, but it is the date that I embedded in the file name, which was supposed to be the date I presented it. It probably wasn't always, but it would get you close at any rate. And then the title, the topic, the type of topic, and a few other notes about it. And I believe I got that uploaded to the group as a portable document format file. Um, did that sometime last week when we were having trouble getting our presentation up. Cross our fingers and hope we don't have that kind of problems this week. Once we get this recorded, we'll be able to get it uploaded to the group in time for it to show up at the scheduled 6 o'clock time. Don't want to get into too much detail about it, but we did have a kind of a big change in the house this week, and without saying what it was, we did have a sort of bulky package delivered, and we got the device out of the package and got it set up and moved the old one to a different room and set it up in the different room. And while we were in the process of that, there's an empty box sitting in the room. And a cat succeeded in knocking the box over, making a bunch of noise. That's what cats are for. If you leave an empty box around, they're going to try to get into it. And they may, in the process, knock it over and fall off, and it doesn't seem to slow them down. They keep right on being nosy. This one cat, I put away the detergent in a cupboard that I don't normally very often open, because we pour the detergent into smaller containers and we get the detergent out of the smaller containers. We only get into that cupboard once every few months in order to refill our smaller containers. So I opened the door and cat jumped in. I closed the door. Normally she can open doors from outside the cupboard, but for some weird reason she couldn't open the door from inside the cupboard. I'm not sure why. But I'm sure the next time a cupboard gets open, she'll go jumping up in there to explore that area, even though she knows she ends up getting stuck. There's
She
a
knows how to grab it and pull it toward her.
right.
So she knows that if she's inside, she should just be able to grab it and pull it toward her. But it doesn't work that way from the inside. And she hasn't figured out. All she has to do is push and she can just walk out.
Yeah. There is a closet at the end of the hallway that has a latch, and that's our linen closet. And sometimes when I go in there to get sheets or blankets or pillows or things like that out of the closet, she'll come charging down the hall and jump up in there. And then, well, all right, that's what you want. I'll close and latch the door, and she'll get stuck in there for a half hour, an hour, even sometimes. And well, she never learns. Next time I open the door, she comes running down there and jumps up in.
You can't get even with you for doing that to her.
How?
She's gonna use she's gonna need a litter box and not have one.
Yeah, well, we'll see. That's the other cat that we have problems with using the litter box. So, but we found out why that was. I do occasionally find little pellets outside the box, but I'm fairly sure from having seen what she does, that's due to her vigorous digging and not to where she actually deposits the stuff. Um, so we have, as you can tell, we have two cats. One of them actually digs in the litter and covers her stuff up. The other one, being a long-haired tortoiseshell with seems to be limited intelligence, gets up to the edge of the litter box, scratches on the edge of the little litter box for a while, and then gets up and leave because nothing covers it up. And it never dawns on her to actually dig in the litter itself. It's always just scratch the side of the box. But the other one does scratch in the litter, and she can get quite vigorous about it and end up scattering stuff up over the edge. But we do see signs. Um, the long-haired cat we got from my wife's son. Um, when when the cat that he bought this one to be a companion for ran away, well then he gave her to us because he didn't need her for a companion for the other cat because the other cat was gone. Well, about a year later, a feral kitten showed up at the apartment complex where he lived, and he enticed the kitten in with food, and he brought that kitten along with him next time he visited. And my wife saw the two playing and told me, and I said, well, okay, we can have her. She grew up because she was a feral kitten and very hungry early in her life to be a little bit overweight. But there are signs that she is losing maybe a little bit of weight and is becoming more active as a result. She's more likely to come running into the room and jump up on top of the back of the chair, which the other one does all the time. She didn't used to do that. She was a little too heavy for it, but she's doing it now, so she may be improving in her health, which I suppose is a good sign. Anyway. Just saw an odd news story, something about climate change causing the city of Boston to sink. And as you know, Boston is a waterfront city, so if it sinks, it could be problematic. Anyway,
I don't need the area, the state needs any more problems than what they've got already.
well, yeah.
You know, if I get the chance, I tell people don't go there. It's a scary place to be.
Well, yeah, that, but also don't go there unless you're rich. The cost of living in the Boston area is out of sight. It's been that way for a long time. Um, Years ago, when I lived in New York, one of the members of the church was trying to get me interested in her daughter, who was working and living in the Boston area. And she was paying an astronomical price for a one-bedroom apartment. She apparently had a pretty good job, was in the medical field, so she was able to afford it, but the prices were just crazy. Anyway, we will probably finish the book of Joshua tonight, and then we'll move into the book of Judges. So let's go ahead and get our study started. We'll bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, thank you for all the blessings that you give to the human race, for creating us, and then for committing yourself and all your resources to redeem a fallen and broken race. We know we didn't deserve it, we didn't earn it. It is just through your grace and goodness that you've chosen to do that. And since you have, we feel the correct response of gratitude would be to avail ourselves of those things that you have provided. We want to understand you and those provisions better. We are going to look into the written word, and we want the Holy Spirit to help us gain a correct and proper understanding of what we read. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, last week we ended at Joshua chapter 20, and we discussed the cities of refuge. There were 6 cities of refuge, 3 on each side of the Jordan. And they were spaced out so that it would be about a day's journey on foot to reach one of the cities of refuge, so that if you accidentally caused a death, you could flee to the city of refuge and be protected there from the avenger of blood, which was a brutal system of retributive justice that was common at the time and was essentially part of the culture that God's people developed in. And so they were kind of adopting that. But God, like he tends to do, while he gives us liberty, he does set limits on what we can do. So we choose to do stupid things, and God says, okay, you can win stupid prizes, but here's your limit. You can't go any farther than this. It's expressed in the book of Job, and of him speaking to the sea and saying, and I'm going to quote out of King James because that's how I learned it years ago, "Hitherto shalt thou come and no further, here shall thy proud waves be stayed." And when you understand the metaphorical use of the sea in the scriptures and the concept of the sea in the culture of the time as an area of the great and fearful unknown, then you can see that actually, even there at that point in the book of Job, God is telling Job, yes, I have an enemy. Yes, he has freedom to do some pretty bad things, but I do set limits on him. He can go so far, but he cannot go farther. So even though God did not approve of retributive justice or the system of the avenger of blood that his people were adopting, he gave them the liberty to do it, but he instituted the cities of refuge to set limits on it. So here we are at chapter 21, and now it's talking about the towns. Yes, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Can you come open this door? It's getting really warm in here.
All right.
Hard to breathe warm.
You want me to turn the heater down or just open the door?
Just open the door.
Okay.
Thank you.
One of the things that I want to see in this chapter is if it names the city of Mahanaim, because it talks about the towns given to the Levites. And it says, "Then the leaders of the tribe of Levi came to consult with Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the leaders of the other tribes of Israel. They came to them at Shiloh in the land of Canaan and said, 'The Lord commanded Moses to give us towns to live in and pasture lands for our livestock.' So by the command of the Lord, the people of Israel gave the Levites the following towns and pasture lands out of their own grants of land." So there was a limited amount of land outside the town that was given to the Levites, so they would have the town and some of the surrounding land as pasture land for their flocks. The descendants of Aaron, who were members of the Kohathite clan within the tribe of Levi, were allotted 13 towns that were originally assigned to the tribes of Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. The other families of the Kohathite clan were allotted 10 towns from the tribes of Ephraim, Dan, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. The clan of Gershon was allotted 13 towns from the tribes of Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and the half-tribe of Manasseh in Bashan. The clan of Merari was allotted 12 towns from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and Zebulun. So the Israelites obeyed the Lord's command to Moses and assigned these towns and pasture lands to the Levites by casting sacred lots, that is, essentially by random selection. The Israelites gave the following towns from the tribes of Judah and Simeon to the descendants of Aaron, who were members of the Kohathite clan within the tribe of Levi, since the sacred lot fell to them first. Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the hill country of Judah, along with its surrounding pasture lands. Arba was an ancestor of Anak. But the open fields beyond the town and the surrounding villages were given to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, as his possession. The following towns with their pasture lands were given to the descendants of Aaron the priest: Hebron, a city of refuge for those who accidentally killed someone; Libnah, Jattir, Eshtemoa, Holon, Debir, Ain, Judah, and Beth Shemesh, 9 towns from those 2 tribes. From the tribe of Benjamin, the priests were given the following towns with their pasture lands: Gibeon, Geba, and I don't know if that's the same Gibeon that was the Gibeon of Saul or what, but it makes sense since it's from Benjamin. Anathoth and Almon, 4 towns. Anathoth is mentioned, if I recall correctly, in the book of Jeremiah. So in all, 13 towns with their pasture lands were given to the priests, the descendants of Aaron. The rest of the Kohathite clans from the tribe of Levi was allotted the following towns and pasture lands from the tribe of Ephraim: Shechem, in the hill country of Ephraim, a city of refuge for those who accidentally killed someone; Gezer, Kibzaim, and Beth Horon, 4 towns. The following towns and pasture lands were allotted to the priests from the tribe of Dan: Eltekeh, Gibbethon, Aijalon, and Gath-Rimmon, 4 towns. The half-tribe of Manasseh allotted the following towns with their pasture lands to the priests: Tanakh and Gath-Rimmon, 2 towns. So in all, 10 towns with their pasture lands were given to the rest of the Kohathite clan. The descendants of Gershon, another clan within the tribe of Levi, received the following towns with their pasture lands from the half-tribe of Manasseh: Golan in Bashan, a city of refuge, and Bishtirah, 2 towns. From the tribe of Issachar, they received the following towns with their pasture lands: Kishion, Daberath, Jarmuth, and En-Ganim, 4 towns. From the tribe of Asher, they received the following towns with their pasture lands: Mishal, Abdon, Helkath, and Rehob, 4 towns. From the tribe of Naphtali, they received the following towns with their pasture lands: Kadesh in Galilee, a city of refuge; Hamath, Dor, and Kartan, 3 towns. So in all, 13 towns with their pasture lands were allotted to the clan of Gershon. The rest of the Levites, the Merari clan, were given the following towns with their pasture lands from the tribe of Zebulun: Jokneam, Karta, Dimnah, and Nahalo, 4 towns. From the tribe of Reuben, they received the following towns with their pasture lands: Bezer, Jahaz, Kedemoth, and Mephath, 4 towns. From the tribe of Gad, they received the following towns with their pasture lands: Ramoth in Gilead, which was a city of refuge, sometimes called Ramoth Gilead; Mahanaim, Heshbon, and Jazer, 4 towns. And Mahanaim is the city that David fled to when Absalom engaged in his attempted coup. So in all, 12 towns were allotted to the clan of Merari. The total number of towns and pasture lands within Israel territory given to the Levites came to 48. Every one of those towns had pasture lands surrounding it. So 6 of the 48 were cities of refuge, and those have just been named for us which ones they were. So the Lord gave to Israel all the land he had sworn to give their ancestors, and they took possession of it and settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had solemnly promised their ancestors. None of their enemies could stand against them, for the Lord helped them conquer all their enemies. Not a single one of all the good promises the Lord had given to the family of Israel was left unfulfilled. Everything he had spoken came true. Now, if you were to read that by itself, the verses 43 to 45 we just read, if you were to read that by itself, you would assume that everything that they needed to do was done. But we're going to read in other places that they didn't finish everything, that it was a long time, possibly only under David, that the nation completed taking all the land that had initially been promised to them. So then you have to decide. Well, was this author speaking in a limited sense? Just they'd done what they needed to do to this point? Or was this author speaking of a completion that later authors would say wasn't complete? That's something you'll have to decide for yourself. Moving on to the next chapter. Chapter 22, the eastern tribes return home. So Joshua called together the tribes of Reuben, Gad, the half-tribe of Manasseh. Those are the ones who took their land on the east side of the Jordan, but they did cross the Jordan with the rest of the fighting men. Their fighting men did anyway, and helped them take the rest of the land. And so Joshua tells them, "You've done as Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and you have obeyed every order I have given you. During all this time, probably about 5 years, you have not deserted the other tribes. You have been careful to obey the commands of the Lord your God right up to the present day. And now the Lord your God has given the other tribes rest as he promised them. So go back home to the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you as your possession on the east side of the Jordan River. But be very careful to obey all the commands and the instructions that Moses gave to you. Love the Lord your God, walk in all his way, obey his commands, hold firmly to him, and serve him with all your heart and all your soul." So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went home. Moses had given the land of Bashan east of the Jordan River to the half-tribe of Manasseh. The other half of the tribe was given the land west of the Jordan. As Joshua sent them away and blessed them, he said to them, "Go back to your homes with the great wealth you have taken from your enemies, the vast herds of livestock, the silver, gold, bronze, and iron, and the large supply of clothing. Share the plunder with your relatives." So the men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh left the rest of Israel at Shiloh in the land of Canaan. They started the journey back to their own land of Gilead, the territory that belonged to them according to the Lord's command through Moses. But while they were still in Canaan, and when they came to a place called Geliloth near the Jordan River, and there's a footnote for that, and the footnote says, or to the circle of stones, which is similarly in verse 11, the men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh stopped to build a large and imposing altar. The rest of Israel heard that the people of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh had built an altar at Geliloth at the edge of the land of Canaan on the west side of the Jordan River. And just for the fun of it, since they put that footnote there, I want to see how the King James handles that. because it sounds like this version is transliterating something that could mean circle of stones. So let me get turned to that chapter here in the King James Version. Okay, that's in verse 10. And when they came unto the borders of Jordan that are in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh built there an altar by Jordan, a great altar to see to. So it doesn't even try to translate that, apparently. The place called Geliloth. Doesn't really have it. And then again in verse over against the land of Canaan. In the borders of Jordan, I guess, is what they're using to translate that Geliloth. Interesting. At any rate, so the people of Israel hear that this has happened. So the whole community of Israel gathered at Shiloh and prepared to go to war against them. You know, that's typical human nature. Somebody does something, you think it's wrong, well, you almost instantaneously resort to violence to deal with the situation. So they're ready to engage in violence against their own brothers over this altar. First, however, they sent a delegation led by Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, to talk with the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. In this delegation were 10 leaders of Israel, one from each of the 10 tribes, and each the head of his family within the clans of Israel. When they arrived in the land of Gilead, they said to the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, "The whole community of the Lord demands to know why you are betraying the God of Israel." Well, now we know how they're interpreting the building of this altar. "How could you turn away from the Lord and build an altar for yourselves in rebellion against him? Was our sin at Peor not enough? To this day we are not fully cleansed of it, even after the plague that struck the entire community of the Lord. And yet today you are turning away from following the Lord. If you rebel against the Lord today, he will be angry with all of us tomorrow." And that's another very human approach to matters like this. To assume that God is like us humans. So if you do something and make God angry, God will be angry with all of us, not just with you, and we'll all suffer as a result of your sin. So that's part of the reason why they're taking such a hard line here. They're thinking in that mode. If you need the altar because the land you possess is defiled, then join us in the Lord's land where the tabernacle of the Lord is situated, and share our land with us. But do not rebel against the Lord or against us by building an altar other than the one true altar of the Lord our God. Didn't divine anger fall on the entire community of Israel when Achan, a member of the clan of Zerah, sinned by stealing the things set apart for the Lord? And that's probably the harem. Yes, that's what that footnote B is all about. He was not the only one who died because of his sin. Then the people of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh answered the heads of the clans of Israel, "The Lord, the Mighty One, is God. The Lord, the Mighty One, is God. He knows the truth, and may Israel know it too. We have not built the altar in treacherous rebellion against the Lord. If we have done so, do not spare our lives this day. If we have built an altar for ourselves to turn away from the Lord, or to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings or peace offerings, may the Lord himself punish us. The truth is, we have built this altar because we fear that in the future your descendants will say to ours, What right do you have to worship the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord has placed the Jordan River as a barrier between our people and you people of Reuben and Gad. You have no claim to the Lord. So your descendants may prevent our descendants from worshiping the Lord. So we decided to build the altar not for burnt offerings or sacrifices, but as a memorial. It will remind our descendants and your descendants that we too have the right to worship the Lord at his sanctuary with our burnt offerings, sacrifices, and peace offerings. Then your descendants will not be able to say to ours, you have no claim to the Lord. Well, this is all speculative, but it might well be based in an understanding of human nature. We know that the Jews would eventually shut out their fellow Israelites, the Samaritans, because they had intermarried. And in the Jewish mind, intermarriage was a terrible thing. It should never be done. You can't worship God with us. You're unclean. You're bad people. We're pushing you out.
But God allowed it.
Huh?
God allowed it.
Well, yeah, God gives us liberty to do make our stupid choices and do the stupid things where our stupid choices have led us to do. So God let them shut out the Samaritans. But when Jesus was here, he ministered to the Samaritans as well as to the Jews.
When they went to war, if they saw a woman that pleased them and they wanted to do the thing with them, they were allowed to take the woman home, and she had to go through a period of mourning for the loss of her parents. She had to shave her head and do a few other things, and then he was allowed to marry her.
On top of all the other wives he already had. Yeah. If they say this, our descendants can reply, look at this copy of the Lord's altar that our ancestors made. It is not for burnt offerings or sacrifices. It is a reminder of the relationship both of us have with the Lord. Far be it from us to rebel against the Lord or turn away from him by building our own altar for burnt offerings, grain offerings, or sacrifices. Only the altar of the Lord our God that stands in front of the tabernacle may be used for that purpose. Now, this is in accord with the instructions given by Moses about the animal offerings. They weren't to offer them just anywhere. They were only to offer them in the one place. And this is the principle that's being reinforced and pledged to here, but it's also a principle that would wander off into the netherworld of memory or dismemory very shortly afterward, and would be a problem even into the days of Solomon. Solomon himself had his vision where he chose wisdom over all the other things at one of the high places in Israel. High places that should not have been used, but the people used them and continued to use them right through the time of the kings up until the captivities in Assyria and Babylon. When Phinehas the priest and the leaders of the community, the heads of the clans of Israel, heard this from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, they were satisfied. Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, replied to them, today we know the Lord is among us, because you have not committed this treachery against the Lord as we thought. Instead, you have rescued Israel from being destroyed by the hand of the Lord. Then Phinehas, son of Eleazar, notice the fear these people are living under. Fear of being destroyed by the hand of the Lord. Well, they were in a situation where they could be destroyed, but they didn't have enough of a grasp of God's character to understand that it wouldn't be by the hand of the Lord, though it might be by the neglect of the Lord from him lifting his protection. At any rate, then Phinehas, son of Eleazar the priest, and the other leaders left the tribes of Reuben and Gad and Gilead and returned to the land of Canaan to tell the Israelites what had happened. And all the Israelites were satisfied and praised God and spoke no more of war against Reuben and Gad. The people of Reuben and Gad named the altar Witness, and the footnote tells us that some manuscripts lack this word. For they said, it is a witness between us and them that the Lord is our God too. And again, I'll look that up in the King James Version. Well, that's interesting. And I'm not sure if that's intended to be read as it is or not. Here's verse 34 from the King James. And the children of Reuben and the children of Gad called the altar Ed, for it shall be a witness between us that the Lord is God. And there's a number there for an alternate reading, and they say there that is a witness. And then a reference to Exodus 18 verse 4. So, okay, yeah. Just for the fun of it, I want to see what the NIV says about that. What they do on that verse. And the Reubenites and the Gadites gave the altar this name, a witness between us that the Lord is God. So they made the whole thing the name there in the NIV. Joshua 23. This might be the most important chapter in the entire book. The years passed, and the Lord had given the people of Israel rest from their enemies. Joshua, who was now very old, called together all the elders, leaders, judges, and officers of Israel. He said to them, I am now a very old man. You have seen everything the Lord your God has done for you during my lifetime. The Lord your God has fought for you against your enemies. That's their view of it. I have allotted to you as your homeland all the land of the nations yet unconquered, as well as the land of those we have already conquered, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. This land will be yours, for the Lord your God will himself drive out all the people living there now. You will take possession of their land, just as the Lord your God promised you. Now remember, we read earlier, back in chapter 21, that they had done everything they needed to do. Well, now here in chapter 23, we're seeing there's still land to be conquered. Interesting. Anyway, verse 6. So be very careful to follow everything Moses wrote in the book of instruction. Do not deviate from it, turning either to the right or to the left. Make sure you do not associate with the other people still remaining in the land. And this mindset being expressed here in verse 7 is the mindset of the Jews in shunning all sorts of people, including the Samaritans. Don't associate with them. They'll contaminate you. And we see that mindset today even. Just associating with people will contaminate you. Well, I suppose there's some truth in that. But the question is whether or not you have grounded yourself in reality and truth, or if you are the kind of person who just goes with a crowd. If you're an unsettled person who tends to go with a crowd, then yeah, you need to be careful what crowd you run with. But if you have,
Say about the parent who doesn't allow the child to choose their own friends.
well, parents do have an obligation to their children to protect them and to,
Yeah,
but a lot of parents overdo that.
blanket statement that if you associate with somebody outside of our religion, then God's going to punish you with hell. Anybody not of this religion is going to just utterly ruin your life. What does that say about the parent?
Well, it says that they don't understand the,
They've been brainwashed by the system.
yeah, they don't understand the concept of being settled. They don't know how to raise children who are settled in their in reality and are therefore immune to peer pressure. They don't know how to do that. So they have to control the peers because they know their children are susceptible to peer pressure.
And how did they get that way?
Through human brokenness, through the abuse of living in a sinful world. That's how they got that way.
They've been subjected to the same teaching. They have probably just passed along what they've been taught.
Well, yeah, that's certainly the case. The acorn doesn't fall far from the tree, they say. But yeah, there is a level of,
I feel so much shame over the way that I was taught to view people that were not within the living in the same church system that I was in. Because if I so much as spoke to them, I was going to burn in hell. They were heathens just simply because they weren't Adventists.
yeah.
I feel so much shame over having felt that way, but I was taught that
Yeah.
by people who didn't know any better.
And that is the foundation of cultism and sectarianism and division within the Christian community. That's why Christianity is so divided and scattered out. 30,000, roughly, different sects or denominations claiming to be Christians, most of them claiming to be exclusive.
Earlier this week, we had some visitors, unexpected.
Yeah, that's a funny story. You want to tell it or you want me to tell it?
I was expecting a home health nurse at any moment, and I'm sitting here in my recliner wearing only my nightgown and my panties. My nightgown's pulled up, my panties are showing. The doorbell rings. Well, it's the nurse coming, and it's a female, so I'm not real worried about it. And Autumn goes to answer the door, and I hear men's voices, 2 men. So I quickly grabbed a blanket that's right here by me and threw it over me as these 2 men walked into the room that I didn't know. And we started talking, and then they told us that they were Bible workers. Not sure.
Yeah, it took me a while to catch on. They were in the room before I figured out they weren't the home health people.
Well, I came right out and told them we are former Seventh-day Adventists. And I told them why we were former, that I just no longer believed it. And they started telling me that God set up the church and we need to stick with the system that God set up. But I cannot do that. And I couldn't tell them that. I can't stick with a system that's being controlled and manipulated by failing human beings. Failing, is that a right word?
I think you wanted fallible.
Yeah. But they wouldn't hear it.
Yeah, well, we got delivered when the real home health nurse showed up.
They started pretexting me.
Yeah, I remember.
And I didn't have a clue what they were talking about. It made no sense at all. Thankfully, the nurse showed up.
Right. And I told her very quietly who was here, because by then I'd figured it out. And I used the initials, so I had to explain what the initials I was using meant. And then she's like, "Oh, really?" So, and she was here for about an hour. She did a very thorough intake, because this was another intake visit. And she was very thorough about it. Anyway, so that was our interesting encounter this week.
Well, you know, those men, lovely men. They were so nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the visit with them. I'm not running them down. I really enjoyed the visit. But they are victims of brainwashing.
Yeah.
You're being controlled by a system that's telling them, don't think for yourself.
Yeah. Believe what we tell you to believe.
Yeah. And here's the proof. Here's the text.
Yeah. Probably taken out of context so that it doesn't really say what it's supposed to. What'd you say?
Don't bother to look into it and figure out what the text is actually saying.
No, because then you wouldn't follow what we want you to follow.
Yeah. Yeah, they're welcome to come back, but they're not going to like what I have to say to them.
Yeah.
They're not going to talk me down.
Yeah. So, reading on here in Joshua 23. Well, what'd you say?
I'm in front of hearing if they try.
Yeah. So be very careful to follow everything Moses wrote in the book of instruction. Do not deviate from it, turning either to the right or to the left. Make sure you do not associate with the other people still remaining in the land. Do not even mention the names of their gods, much less swear by them or serve them or worship them. Rather, cling tightly to the Lord your God as you have done until now. Now, we have to put this speech that we're just starting to read here in a historical context. And the historical context is a history of idolatry. We're about 1,500 years before Christ at this point. The people will have approximately 500 years living under the judges, followed by 500 years living under their kings. And during all that time, the problem of idolatry will keep cropping up, keep popping up here and there, or even taking over the whole country. Sometimes the kings would engage in idolatry, meaning pretty much everybody else went along and did whatever the king was leading them to do. And it is at this point that Joshua is saying, this is what you need to avoid. you need to avoid getting involved with these false gods. Because what is the principle of worship? Hello?
Yeah.
What is the law of worship? Did I lose you?
Yeah, you did.
The law or principle of worship is that you become like whatever it is that you worship.
By beholding, we are changed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, if the people worship a false god, they begin acting like that false god. They take on the character and nature of that false god, and that nature is naturally destructive.
Yeah, we can prove that. Look in your own life. You may have a vocabulary that is rated G. Nothing immoral about it. Now, if you hang around and start listening to movies, videos, friends, acquaintances, co-workers, and they let these four-letter words slip frequently, you're going to find yourself using those four-letter words.
Reading on. For the Lord has driven out great and powerful nations for you, and no one has yet been able to defeat you. Each one of you will put to flight 1,000 of the enemy, for the Lord your God fights for you just as he has promised. So be very careful to love the Lord your God. But if you turn away from him and cling to the customs of the survivors of these nations remaining among you, and if you intermarry with them, then know for certain that the Lord your God will no longer drive them out of your land. Instead, they will be a snare and a trap to you, a whip for your backs, and thorny brambles in your eyes, and you will vanish from this good land the Lord your God has given you. Soon I will die, going the way of everything on earth. Deep in your hearts you know that every promise of the Lord your God has come true. Not a single one has failed. But as surely as the Lord your God has given you the good things he promised, he will also bring disaster on you if you disobey him. And this is Joshua restating the terms of the old covenant. Good things if you obey, bad things if you disobey. He will completely destroy you from this good land he has given you. If you break the covenant of the Lord your God by worshiping and serving other gods, his anger will burn against you, and you will quickly vanish from the good land he has given you. And then the concluding chapter of the book, chapter 24. Then Joshua summoned all the tribes of Israel to Shechem, including their elders, leaders, judges, and officers. So they came and presented themselves to God. Joshua said to the people, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Long ago your ancestors, including Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor, lived beyond the Euphrates River, and they worshipped other gods." The Euphrates River is probably saying it's just the river in Hebrew, but that's what the river refers to, would be the Euphrates River. And we know that because Abram was from Ur of the Chaldees, or the Chaldeans, that he would have lived in that territory, possibly beyond the Euphrates River. "But I took your ancestor Abraham from the land beyond the Euphrates and led him into the land of Canaan. I gave him many descendants through his son Isaac. To Isaac I gave Jacob and Esau. To Esau I gave the mountains of Seir, while Jacob and his children went down into Egypt. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I brought terrible plagues on Egypt, and afterward I brought you out as a free people. But when your ancestors arrived at the Red Sea, or possibly the sea of reeds. That's what the Hebrew says. But we believe that it was, in fact, what we today call the Red Sea. The Egyptians chased after you with chariots and charioteers. When your ancestors cried out to the Lord, I put darkness between you and the Egyptians. I brought the sea crashing down on the Egyptians, drowning them. With your very own eyes you saw what I did. Then you lived in the wilderness for many years. Finally, I brought you into the land of the Amorites on the east side of the Jordan. They fought against you, but I destroyed them before you. I gave you victory over them, and you took possession of their land. Then Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, started the war against Israel. He summoned Balaam, son of Beor, to curse you, but I would not listen to him. Instead, I made Balaam bless you, and so I rescued you from Balak. When you crossed the Jordan River and came to Jericho, the men of Jericho fought against you, as did the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. But I gave you victory over them, and I sent terror ahead of you to drive out the two kings of the Amorites. It was not your swords or bows that brought you victory. I gave you land you had not worked on, and I gave you towns you did not build, the towns where you are now living. I gave you vineyards and olive groves for food, though you did not plant them. And terror, that's probably going to say the Hebrew means, the often rendered the hornet, the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. And we've run across that a number of times, including way back in Exodus when God first talked about it. And this is this is Joshua quoting the Creator, Yahweh. This is what the Lord God of Israel says, and now the rest of this is all him. So he's speaking for God, and likely he's putting a few words in God's mouth that God would not actually have spoken, just because of his viewpoint of God. So, verse 13, he talks about you got land that you didn't work on. You didn't earn it. It was a gift from me, not something you earned. So, founded on that, knowing that you owe your current lifestyle to the Creator, fear the Lord and serve him wholeheartedly. Put away forever the idols your ancestors worshipped when they lived beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt. So God called Abraham away from idolatry, the idolatry of the Chaldeans, and then God had to call his people away from idolatry again, the idolatry that they learned in the land of Egypt. So Joshua tells them, serve the Lord alone. But if you refuse to serve the Lord, then choose today whom you will serve. Or as Popeye would say, mix up your mind. Would you prefer the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates? Or will it be the gods of the Amorites in whose land you now live? But as for me and my family, we will serve Yahweh. So the call here is to make a choice. The people are free to choose. Joshua spells out the consequences of the choices, but he does call on them to make a choice. God does not force himself on us. Even today, God calls on us to choose. And we can choose him, or we can choose the way the world does things. Worldliness, we sometimes call it. The people replied, we would never abandon the Lord and serve other gods. For the Lord our God is the one who rescued us and our ancestors from slavery in the land of Egypt. He performed mighty miracles before our very eyes. As we traveled through the wilderness among our enemies, he preserved us. It was the Lord who drove out the Amorites and the other nations living here in the land. So we too will serve the Lord, for he alone is our God. Joshua calls on them to make a choice. They make a choice, publicly anyway. They assert that they want to serve the Creator. Then Joshua warned the people, "You are not able to serve the Lord, for he is a holy and jealous God. He will not forgive your rebellion and your sins." Well, that seems contrary to what we read in the New Testament and even elsewhere in the Old Testament, where God does forgive rebellion and sin. But Joshua is trying to make a point. If you abandon the Lord and serve other gods, he will turn against you and destroy you, even though he's been so good to you. But the people answer, what?
Father, forgive them,
Yeah.
for they don't know what they're doing.
No, they don't. I heard somebody use that the other day. I don't know if I told you that. I told you about the case. A woman had come to San Antonio to visit her granddaughter for her granddaughter's 16th birthday. While they were visiting a public place in the San Antonio area, Grandma needed to use the restroom. She went to the bathroom. While she was there, a mentally ill woman who had been released from the hospital, even though the doctors knew she wasn't cured, came in and began stabbing her. And the woman's granddaughter heard her screams and came in, got out her own knife, and began stabbing her grandmother's assailant. But there was a little element of the story that was told that I may not have mentioned to you. At some point during the attack, grandmother, in desperation, said, "Father, forgive her. She doesn't know what she's doing."
You didn't tell me that.
No, I didn't. And grandmother believed that that caused her attacker to pause, giving her granddaughter an opening to get in there and deliver her. But just an interesting aspect of that story. And I think that happened several years ago. I didn't have an exact date for it, but they were talking about 2019 in there. And grandmother was only a year older at the time she gave her testimony. So that likely would have been in 2020 when this thing took, this court case took place. But anyway. Reading on, verse 21, "But the people answered Joshua, 'No, we will serve the Lord.'" Of course, we know from the history that didn't last but about a generation. "You are a witness to your own decision," Joshua said. "You have chosen to serve Yahweh, the Creator." "Yes," they replied, "we are witnesses to what we have said." "All right then," Joshua said, "destroy the idols among you and turn your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel." The people said to Joshua, "We will serve the Lord our God. We will obey him alone." So Joshua made a covenant with the people that day at Shechem, committing them to follow the decrees and regulations of the Lord. Joshua recorded these things in the book of God's instructions. As a reminder of their agreement, he took a huge stone and rolled it beneath the terebinth tree beside the tabernacle of the Lord. Joshua said,
"Follow a list of rules."
Yeah. Joshua said to all the people, "This stone has heard everything the Lord said to us. It will be a witness to testify against you if you go back on your word to God." Then Joshua sent all the people away to their own homelands. After this, Joshua son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. Moses made it to 120. Joshua made it to 110. They buried him in the land he had been allocated at Timnath-serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. And it's interesting, at this point in history, we're drawing very close to what God said back there in Genesis chapter 6. That man's time on earth would be 120 years. Isn't that what Genesis 6 says? We can go back there and look real quick. Then the Lord said, My spirit will not contend with man forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. Moses met that exactly. Joshua fell 10 years short. Of course, we know eventually the psalmist would talk about 70, which is about how long that David lived. By the way, I've met my 70 now, so I'm living on borrowed time, shall we say? They buried him in the land he had been allocated at Timnath-serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. The people of Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him, those who had personally experienced all the Lord had done for Israel. The bones of Joseph, which the Israelites had brought along with them when they left Egypt, were buried at Shechem, the plot of land Jacob had bought from the sons of Hamor for 100 pieces of silver. This land was located in the territory allotted to the descendants of Joseph. And 100 casitos is the 100 pieces of silver. Eleazar, son of Aaron, also died. He was buried in the hill country of Ephraim in the town of Gibeah, which had been given to his son Phinehas. And that concludes the book of Joshua. So, the book of Judges picks up and talks more about things. Essentially just kind of continues the narrative. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord which tribe should go first to attack the Canaanites. The Lord answered, Judah, for I have given them victory over the land. The men of Judah said to their relatives from the tribe of Simeon, Join with us to fight against the Canaanites living in the territory allotted to us. Then we will help you conquer your territory. So the men of Simeon went with Judah. When the men of Judah attacked, the Lord gave them victory over the Canaanites and Perizzites, and they killed 10,000 enemy warriors at the town of Bezek. While at Bezek, they encountered King Adoni-Bezek and fought against him, and the Canaanites and Perizzites were defeated. Adoni-Bezek escaped, but the Israelites soon captured him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Can anyone say cruelty? Adoni-Bezek said, I once had 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off, eating scraps from under my table.
How
Now,
about brutality?
what?
How about brutality?
Yeah. Now God has paid me back for what I did to them. They took him to Jerusalem, and he died there. Now that's interesting because it would remain for David to take the city of Jerusalem. Is it possible that they're calling some other place Jerusalem and that they called the city of the Jebusites, the city of Jebus, Jerusalem only after David took it? Or are they speaking of the city of the Jebusites and that somehow during the time of the judges they lost control of the city and the original inhabitants took it back over? I couldn't tell you. I'm not sure that history could even tell you that for certain. The men of Judah attacked Jerusalem and captured it, killing all its people and setting the city on fire. Then they went down to fight the Canaanites living in the hill country, the Negev, and the western foothills. Footnote A there, the Shephelah. That's what the Hebrew says. Judah marched against the Canaanites in Hebron, formerly called Kiriath Arba, defeating the forces of Shishai, Ahiman, and Talmai. From there they went to fight against the people living in the town of Debir, formerly called Kiriath Sefer. Caleb said, I will give my daughter Achsah in marriage to the one who attacks and captures Kiriath Sefer. Othniel, the son of Caleb's younger brother Kenaz, was the one who conquered it, so Achsah became Othniel's wife. In other words, he got to marry his cousin. When Achsah married Othniel, she urged him to ask her father for a field. As she got down off her donkey, Caleb asked her, What's the matter? She said, Let me have another gift. You have already given me land in the Negev. Now, please give me springs of water, too. So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. Not exactly sure why that's recorded, but it is, so there it is. Maybe it explained the possession of the upper and lower springs. When the tribe of Judah left Jericho, the city of palms, the Kenites, who were descendants of Moses' father-in-law, traveled with them into the wilderness of Judah. They settled among the people there near the town of Arad in the Negev. And the Kenites will show up in this story in the book of Judges in the future here. Then Judah joined with Simeon to fight against the Canaanites living in Zephath. And they completely destroyed, that's the Harem again, the town. So the town was named Hormah. So footnotes C and D. The Hebrew term, yes, that's the Harem. And then Hormah means destruction. In addition, Judah captured the towns of Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron, along with their surrounding territories. Now, those are towns that belong to the Philistines. They shouldn't have been capturing them, but they did. And the Philistines fought them. And you could probably argue until the cows come home and not decide which came first. Did the Philistines attack the Israelites first? Did the Israelites attack the Philistines first? Does it even matter? When I was a teacher, I used to tell my students, if I catch you in a fight, I don't want to hear who started it. Who started it doesn't matter. I want to hear who stopped it. Anyway. The Lord was with the people of Judah, and they took possession of the hill country, but they failed to drive out the people living in the plains who had iron chariots. The town of Hebron was given to Caleb, as Moses had promised, and Caleb drove out the peoples living there who were descendants of the 3 sons of Anak. The tribe of Benjamin, however, failed to drive out the Jebusites, who were living in Jerusalem. So to this day, the Jebusites live in Jerusalem among the people of Benjamin. And this gets confusing, doesn't it? Because we just read that the men of Judah had taken Jerusalem and set the city on fire, killed all its people. We're still in the same chapter. And now we're saying that the tribe of Benjamin didn't drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. So they were still there. Figure that out, huh? The descendants of Joseph attacked the town of Bethel, and the Lord was with them. They sent men to scout out Bethel, formerly known as Luz. They confronted a man coming out of the town and told him, "Show us a way into the town, we will have mercy on you." So he showed them a way in, and they killed everyone in the town except that man and his family. Later the man moved to the land of the Hittites, where he built a town. He named it Luz, which is its name to this day. The tribe of Manasseh failed to drive out the people living in Beth Shan, Tanakh, Dor, Ibleam, Megiddo, and their surrounding settlements, because the Canaanites were determined to stay in that region. When the Israelites grew stronger, they forced the Canaanites to work as slaves, but they never did drive them completely out of the land. The tribe of Ephraim failed to drive out the Canaanites living in Gezer, so the Canaanites continued to live there among them. The tribe of Zebulun failed to drive out the residents of Kitron and Nahalal, So the Canaanites continued to live among them. But the Canaanites were forced to work as slaves for the people of Zebulun. I can understand it, but I can also find it odd. You know, if it's life as a slave or death, that's a tough choice. Life as a slave's got to be pretty miserable, but I suppose these people felt life at all of any sort was better than death, so they opted to become slaves. That's what the Gibeonites did, the choice they made. The tribe of Asher failed to drive out the residents of Akko, Sidon, Olib, Achzib, Helba, Aphek, and Rehob. Instead, the people of Asher moved in among the Canaanites who controlled the land, for they failed to drive them out. Likewise, the tribe of Naphtali failed to drive out the residents of Beth-Shemesh and Beth-Anath. Instead, they moved in among the Canaanites who controlled the land. Nevertheless, the people of Beth-Shemesh and Beth-Anath were forced to work as slaves for the people of Naphtali. As for the tribe of Dan, the Amorites forced them back into the hill country and would not let them come down into the plains. The Amorites were determined to stay in Mount Heres, Aijalon, and Shaalbim, but when the descendants of Joseph became stronger, they forced the Amorites to work as slaves. The boundary of the Amorites ran from Scorpion Pass to Selah and continued upward from there, Scorpion Pass or Akrabim. Judges chapter 2. The Lord's messenger comes to Bochim. The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said to the Israelites, I brought you out of Egypt into this land that I swore to give your ancestors, and I said I would never break my covenant with you. For your part, you were not able to make any covenants with the people living in this land. Instead, you were to destroy their altars. But you disobeyed my command. Why did you do this? So now I declare that I will no longer drive out the people living in your land. They will become thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a constant temptation to you. They will be in your sides, is what the Hebrew says. Compare Numbers 33, verse 55. When the angel of the Lord finished speaking to all the Israelites, the people wept loudly. So they called the place Bochim, which means weeping, and they offered sacrifices there to the Lord. After Joshua sent the people away, each of the tribes left to take possession of the land allotted to them. And the Israelites served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and the leaders who outlived him, those who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. We read that in chapter 1 as well. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110. They buried him in the land he had been allocated at Timnath-Serah in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash, which is a repetition from what we were told at the end of the book of Judges. As in the parallel text, Joshua 24:30, the Hebrew reads Timnath-Heres, a variant of spelling of Timnath-Serah. Almost backwards. Not exactly, but anyway. After that generation died, another generation grew up who did not acknowledge the Lord or remember the mighty things he had done for Israel. The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight and served the images of Baal. Now, a word here about that. Because it is tradition in the English language and in other languages to use a term like Lord to represent the Tetragrammaton, the special name for God. Do you know what's the meaning of Baal? Baal also means Lord. If it was wrong for the Israelites to serve Baal or Lord, why would it be appropriate to use the word Lord, or in the German Herr, to refer to the special name for God, the Tetragrammaton? But it's what we do. What'd you say?
women back then referred to their husbands as Lord.
Yeah.
There are people in other cultures who refer to the landowner as Lord.
Yes.
Would that not be a different meaning than deity? Would it mean more like leader?
Yeah. The one in charge. The one who gets to make the decisions, which is then a negation of God's intent that we all have freedom of choice.
But God doesn't get his way.
No, because he gives people liberty. So people do things that aren't his way.
So he should not be referred to as Lord.
Interesting. Yeah. And in fact, you will read Christian authors who make a big deal about how often the word Lord shows up. But maybe it shouldn't. It's Yahweh, the Creator, we're to worship, not someone who's in charge. At any rate, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight, served the images of Baal. They abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt. They went after other gods, worshiping the gods of the people around them, and they angered the Lord. They abandoned the Lord to serve Baal and the images of Ashtoreth. They began worshiping false gods, and they became like the false gods. And that was, by very nature, destructive to them. This made the Lord burn with anger against Israel. Well, what does God do when he gets angry? He lets us have what we want, right? So he handed them over. This is a term that's very often associated with God's wrath. He gives them over. He hands them over.
Well, it may be a case of you're going to have to experience it for yourself to know why I'm telling you not to.
Yeah. So he handed them over to raiders who stole their possessions. He turned them over to their enemies all around, and they were no longer able to resist them. Every time Israel went out to battle, the Lord fought against them, causing them to be defeated, just as he had warned, and the people were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges to rescue the Israelites from their attackers. This...
Didn't fight against them.
What?
The Lord didn't fight against them.
No, but that's how they saw it.
Well, and they weren't as strong as they wanted to be.
Right? Never were. Then the Lord raised up judges to rescue the Israelites from their attackers. Yet Israel did not listen to the judges, but prostituted themselves by worshiping other gods. How quickly they turned away from the path of their ancestors, who had walked in obedience to the Lord's command. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge over Israel, he was with that judge and rescued the people from their enemies throughout the judge's lifetime. For the Lord took pity on his people who were burdened by oppression and suffering. But when the judge died, the people returned to their corrupt ways, behaving worse than those who had lived before them. They went after other gods, serving and worshiping them, and they refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. In other words, they were stiff-necked. They were hard-headed. They were so sure they were right, they were unwilling to change their minds.
They were Karens.
So the Lord burned with anger against Israel. He said, because these people have violated my covenant, which I made with their ancestors, and have ignored my commands, I will no longer drive out the nations that Joshua left unconquered when he died. I did this to test Israel, to see whether or not they would follow the ways of the Lord, as their ancestors did. That is why the Lord left those nations in place, and this is, the viewpoint of the authors. He did not quickly drive them out or allow Joshua to conquer them all. And while we're a little bit short, I think that is a good place to stop, because if I recall correctly, the next chapter, well, Yeah, the next chapter actually starts some of the stories of the judges. There is a brief section at the beginning about the nations that were left in Canaan, and then we read the stories of Othniel. Othniel, as you may recall, was the one who took the city, and he was Caleb's nephew, and he married Caleb's daughter. So there was Othniel, and then Ehud, and then Shamgar. We'll read about those in the next chapter when we get there. So, even though it's just a few minutes short from what we normally run, I think this is a good place to stop because I don't think we get this chapter done in the 5 minutes we have left. And rather than take a chance on running over, I think we'll just stop here. Anything you wanted to say or that you came to mind while we were reading this?
No, I said it.
Okay. Well, we invite you to join us next week when we'll get into the actual stories of the various judges and some of the gory details that get narrated as a part of this story. And we invite you to join us then next week. And until then,
Wait. Prayer requests, people, please keep Karen, Aiden, and Seth in your prayers. They're all facing some serious criminal charges, which are absolutely insane that they're even facing this. Please keep them in your prayers, and if you want to know what I'm talking about, go to YouTube and look up Karen Reed.
Okay, so then, until next week, we say goodbye and God bless.
Bye, everyone.